NATO sent its finest military equipment. The battlefield gave it a brutal reality check. Last time we ranked NATO's so-called game changers sent to Ukraine, the weapons that were supposed to turn the tide of the war. This is where we last left off in part 1. Now it's time for part 2. Buckle up because we're going bigger! Leopard 2, M1A1 Abrams, F-16s, and many more NATO weapons. Everything that has been reshaping the front lines, or not. No NATO propaganda, no Kremlin cope, just brutal honesty on the actual performance of the weapons on the battlefield. But there's something else you have to know. Silver is absolutely indispensable to modern weaponry because of its unmatched electrical conductivity, thermal stability, and corrosion resistance. And that's why today I wanted to talk to you about silver. Institutions now know that tariffs remain in place, so the dollar sell-off is likely to continue. In 1968 and in 2000, the two previous times US equities were this overvalued, silver soared 2,500% and 1,200% in the decade that followed. What will happen this time? One billionaire who called the 2000 silver market is Mr. Eric Sprott. He stands as one of the most legendary figures in precious metals investing. And this is what he had to say about silver.
When the gentleman at Morgan Stanley suggested the new model portfolio 60-20-20 with 20 being precious metals.
Right.
Whoa, my God.
Right.
Blow the lid off. That just blows the lid off. We wouldn't even recognize the number. You know?
Right.
Like it could be like $1,000 for silver to get to 20% silver.
Eric Sprott owns roughly 4% of Kootenai Silver, the sponsor of today's video, our newest pure play silver for 2026. The ticker symbol is KOOYF. And it's available on Schwab, Fidelity, Interactive Brokers, and E-Trade. KOOYF shares currently stand at 1.09 USD. Meanwhile, Research Capital value it at 270 Canadian dollars and Red Cloud at 320 Canadian dollars, equivalent to roughly 2 and 230 US dollars. 2 times more. Conduct your due diligence on Kootenai Silver. Quality silver assets are scarce. There's not enough silver available on the market. Yet Kootenai Silver owns 4 silver deposits. Only a handful of companies globally control deposits of this scale and grade. This is the most important piece of information I can share with you right now. As you can see here, as of January 1st, 2026, when comparing between various silver companies, that is their enterprise value divided by the size of their resource size, we see that Kootenai Silver is priced at only $0.36 per ounce of silver equivalent, whereas the average of these select 15 companies is $2.18 per ounce. Kootenai Silver, with its market cap of 188 million Canadian dollars, is scheduled to drill about 70,000 meters in the coming 12 months. That's $2,570 of market cap for every meter. As you can see, no other silver company has so much drilling planned and underway. With that low of a market cap, research Kootenai Silver, ticker KOOYF, and do your homework on it. Now that you know everything about silver, let's rank some baddies, some NATO baddies. This is where we last left off in part 1. Since we're going in chronological order, the next weapon system was pledged in December 2022 but only arrived in Ukraine in April 2023, the Patriot air defense system. Will US Patriot missiles really be a game changer in Ukraine? The MIM-104 Patriot, a long-range surface-to-air missile system that played a pivotal role in Ukraine's air defense strategy, particularly against Russian ballistic and hypersonic threats. Ukraine received 3 batteries from the US, each battery typically including 4 to 8 launchers, a command center, and support vehicles. Ukraine also got an additional 3 batteries from Germany, 1 from Romania, plus another 5 launchers from the Netherlands and 2 refurbished ones from Israel as well. The Patriots were very important because they supplemented and augmented Ukraine's depleting Soviet-era S-300 inventory. The first problem is a simple numbers game. With only 7 to 8 batteries, Patriots could only cover 10 to 15% of Ukrainian airspace. In turn, Patriots were mostly used to cover key infrastructures, while S-300s covered the rest of the country. That's how, on the 4th of May 2023, only a couple weeks after the arrival of the first Patriot launchers, Ukraine's 96th Anti-Aircraft Missile Regiment was credited with the first confirmed interception of a Kinjal over Kyiv. This was historic because Russia claimed its missile was uninterceptable. Wreckage was recovered, thus confirming the hit. This was the world's first downing of a Kinjal in combat, and this using a US-supplied Patriot battery. The Patriots then suffered from its success. Ukrainian air defense fired so many interceptors that US inventory soon got critically low. Perhaps that was also the Russian strategy. Meanwhile, Russia employed the Geran-2 drones and cheap decoys in massive swarms, often hundreds per night, to saturate Ukrainian air defenses. That's how Ukraine burned through a lot of its reserves. Since receiving its first Patriot system in April 2023, by July 2025, Ukraine reportedly fired over 1,000 interceptors. It's significant considering the entire US annual production is just 600 missiles per year, but with a reported 80 to 90% interception rate. My friend says the same thing after going out. Yet whenever I see him talk to a girl, he just starts to stutter. And you know what? At times, Ukrainian air defense was just so good that it shut down more missiles than the Russians had even launched.
We are winning!
Jokes aside, then came a bigger challenge. By spring 2024, the Russians upgraded their missiles, and the Wall Street Journal declared that Ukraine's interception rate had sharply declined. Patriot batteries just couldn't keep up. Here we have a video from June 2025 showing a Patriot PAC-3 interceptor missing a Russian KH-101 cruise missile above Kyiv. Here's another footage of a malfunctioning Patriot interceptor, this time in September. It's not a surprise that by October 2025, the Financial Times wrote, "Russian missile upgrade outpaces Ukraine's Patriot defenses." In the last year, the Russian armed forces modified its Iskander-M system. The missiles now follow a typical trajectory before diverting and plunging into a steep terminal dive or executing maneuvers that confuse and avoid Patriot interceptors. According to Ukrainian Air Force data, Ukraine's ballistic missile interception rate improved over the summer, reaching 37% in August, but it plummeted to 6% in September despite fewer launchers. This suddenly meant Ukraine had to fire more interceptors. But then in January 2026, it was reported that Kyiv's Air Force was so short of PAC-3 interceptor missiles for its Patriot air defense systems last month that their launchers sat empty. And then Ukraine was saved at the last minute by Spain. As Spain sent 5 Patriot missiles to Ukraine.
Oh, okay.
Initially, the Patriot system could be placed in the B tier. Patriots remain Ukraine's primary defense against Russian ballistic missiles, with various success rates depending on enemy tactics, missile types, and numbers. At the same time, we do have to admit that in the past 6 months, Patriot systems seem to have become much less effective as a whole, reaching a 6% interception rate in Ukraine. That's terrible. And on top of that, it's just too expensive to replenish. Because of these factors, the Patriot had to be relegated to Tier D. Now comes the M2A2 Bradley. The M2A2 is an American infantry fighting vehicle that can carry 6 fully equipped soldiers. It is armed with a 25mm chain gun, 2-tow anti-tank missile launchers, as well as a 7.62mm coaxial machine gun. It's a beast. And because of that, many called it a game changer in preparation of Ukraine's 2023 summer offensive. The US pledged 109 M2 Bradleys in January 2023, with the first batch of 31 arriving in May of the same year. More would come in the following weeks. These IFVs were all concentrated in the infamous 47th Mechanized Brigade, the unit meant to spearhead the assault against the Surovikin line. But things didn't go as expected. Just as the offensive started, the first column of the 47th Brigade got annihilated. We all remember this famous steel graveyard nicknamed Bradley Square. 7 Bradleys knocked out within a couple meters of each other. 1 week after the start of the offensive, already 16 M2A2s were lost, and with very little territorial gains to show for. By the end of Ukraine's summer offensive around the 20th of September, 53 Bradleys had been officially destroyed, damaged, or abandoned. The Ukrainian offensive failed, but was it the fault of the machine or because the entire Ukrainian battle plan was at fault? The Washington Post interviewed the commander of a Bradley fighting vehicle who goes by the call sign Frenchman, and he said, "We thought it was going to be a simple 2-day task to take Robotine. This is what they were told by their officers."
They scare them. When we hear the radio and they hear that Bradley coming, they started to run away.
You hear their radios
Yeah.
that they know you're coming in the Bradley,
Yeah.
and they run away.
In other words, they got high off their own supplies and greatly overestimated the impact the M2A2 Bradley would have on the battlefield. Surprisingly, despite the failure of Ukraine's offensive, the M2A2 Bradley's reputation remained high. According to this crew member, the vehicle survived 3 anti-tank mine explosions. It's only after the 3rd detonation that the Bradley was immobilized, but everyone inside was safe. In the fall of 2023, it's Bradley hit-and-run attacks that single-handedly prevented the encirclement of Avdiivka, and then in the following winter, it's once again Bradleys that considerably slowed down Russian progression after the fall of the fortress. The M2A2 could even stand its ground against enemy tanks. For example, in January 2024, it engaged and disabled a Russian T-90M tank at close range. That's quite a feat of arms. A couple months later, another unit spotted a T-80 tank 2 kilometers away at night and destroyed it by firing a single TOW missile. The machine was clearly not at fault. The blame and failure was blamed on the 47th Mechanized Brigade. But given how effective the Bradley IFVs were, they were quickly reassigned to other units. That's how the 425th Assault Regiment SCALP made heavy use of Bradley starting in June 2024 and viewed it as a central component of its combat doctrine. Overall, SCALP made excellent use of its fleet of Bradleys. Many other Ukrainian units observed its effectiveness to launch rapid counterattacks. For example, in this video from October 2025 by the 13th Khartia Brigade, we can see an infantry squad conducting training operations with an M2A2 Bradley infantry fighting vehicle. A total of 187 M2A2 Bradleys were reported as destroyed, damaged, or abandoned, out of about 300 deliveries, which is quite significant, a loss ratio of about 60%. Knowing Oryx, it could be much higher in reality, especially if we take into consideration how Ukrainian repair crews will have to cannibalize certain Bradleys to repair others. But you know what? This number proves that Ukrainian troops actually love the Bradley. They use it all the time on the battlefield, and they want more of these IVs. The Bradley has developed a reputation for lethality, reliability, crew safety, speed, and ability to cover even the worst ground at speed, especially since the AFU has no equivalent to replace it with. For this reason, I will place the M2A2 Bradley as a solid member of Tier S, alongside the Caesar. Now let's look at the other side of the Ukrainian summer offensive with the German Leopard 2. Do you remember how the entire mainstream media talked about this tank as a game changer? How the West's new tanks could give Ukraine a battlefield edge over Russia? Germany's Leopard 2 tank, an ace in the hole for Ukraine. Oh, and my favorite one from NPR. The German-made Leopard 2 is one of the most well-reputed battle tanks in the world, perhaps only second to the US-made M1 Abrams tank. Oh, is that so? We'll get to that. On the 28th of January 2023, over 3 years ago, I posted this video titled, "German tanks will once again burn in the steppes of Ukraine." And believe me, Redditors hated me for it. But unfortunately, this is exactly what ended up happening. Ukraine was so confident about the performance of Leopard 2s that it was given the lead role in the trailer for the counteroffensive. By June 1st, 2023, Ukraine had received about 60 Leopard 2 tanks from its allies. 38 were older Leopard 2A4 variants and 21 of the more advanced Leopard 2A6. They were meant to spearhead the Ukrainian offensive by providing the armored punch needed to breach fortified lines. Easy!
Let's go, in and out, 20 minutes adventure.
They simply forgot about the enemy. Minefields, ATGMs, attack helicopters, and loitering munitions. On the 8th of June 2023, for the first time, a German Leopard 2 was destroyed in Ukraine. You can guess by what type of weapon. Russian artillery! Immediately after, another one was destroyed at Bradley Square. And then more and more Leopard 2s got picked off one after the other by Russian drone strikes. Once again, who's at fault, the machine or the tactics? Before even the summer offensive, the Ukrainians fitted a layer of Contact 1 explosive reactive armor to supplement the blindage of the Leopard 2. Since then, the AFU lost 50 Leopard 2 tanks, or roughly 50% of the total deliveries. Well, remember the terrible advice Ukrainian tank crews received on the training grounds in Germany.
Wir hatten gemeinsame Übungen und da haben wir die Deutschen dann gefragt, wie geht ihr denn durch ein Minenfeld? Und sie sagten uns, wir fahren drumherum. Auf ihren Karten ist ein Minenfeld halt 200 mal 100 Meter Größe. Aber das gibt's hier nicht. Hier reden wir von Hektar um Hektar. Es ist viel schwerer hier.
Overall, Ukraine received between 100 to 110 tanks from the Leopard 2 family, including the Swedish Stridsvagn 122. It's quite significant. Thing is, just like all German vehicles, maintenance is a bitch. If you've owned a German car, you know what I'm talking about. For the Ukrainian units operating Leopard 2s, off-road maintenance proved to be a nightmare without German spare parts. In a classified report, we learned that the Leopard 2's complicated design makes it difficult to repair on the battlefield, meaning that damaged Leopards must be sent to specialized repair crews in West Ukraine, or even go all the way to Poland to be fixed and maintained. And the worst is that there's a shortage of spare parts at the front line and at the repair center as well. Because of that, Ukrainian mechanics cannibalized the most badly damaged Leopard 2s before loading them onto trucks and trains for transport to Poland or Lithuania. In March 2026, articles like this one said the Leopard 2 is a total flop. But personally, although I love a good roast, I believe they failed to make a compelling argument to support their claim. Although it's true that Ukrainian media reported that the logistics of maintaining the Leopard 2s had become too much of a burden, Ukrainian tank crews still seem to like operating on Leopard 2s, especially when combined with M2A2 Bradleys. That's why I will rank the Leopard 2 in Tier B. It's not a Wunderwaffe, but it does the job. It's the only NATO tank delivered to Ukraine that is still highly active on the battlefield. Oh! Spoilers. Well, this leads us to the Challenger 2. Look, let's not waste any more time. Straight F. Next. Okay, I think you deserve an explanation. Look, it's not because the Challenger 2 failed the 1992 Kuwait trials that it's necessarily a bad tank, right? The UK supplied 14 Challenger 2 tanks to Ukraine in early 2023, primarily for elite units like the 82nd Air Assault Brigade. Contrary to the Leopard 2s, the Challengers were not really used in combat. One tank got destroyed towards the end of Ukraine's summer offensive, relatively far from the front, and that was the end of their combat history in Ukraine. And then they just sat there. Look, maybe I'm exaggerating. Here we can see Challenger 2 supporting Ukraine's incursion into Kursk Oblast, and his crews seem to be quite satisfied with the armored vehicle they were operating. Challenger 2 British quality perfect tank. Probably because they were given the choice of either operating the Challenger 2 or being part of the next Storm detachment. Yeah, and then another Challenger was destroyed a couple days after the start of the Kursk operation. Maybe the one we just saw, followed by an additional one that was damaged in December 2024 in Kursk as well. The reality is that the Challenger 2's weight caused it to get bogged down in soft ground, which is far from ideal in a country like Ukraine. Here on Forbes, a Ukrainian tank crew explained, the 71-ton British tank is heavy. Cross-country mobility is difficult for our ground. In comparison, the Leopard 2 weighs about 55 tons and 42 tons for the Ukrainian T-64 BV tank. That's already a big problem. But then it came another challenge. The Challenger 2's 1,200 horsepower engine is underpowered for a 71-ton vehicle. The worst is that the Challenger 2 couldn't even just sit there and look pretty for the cameras. Defense UA reported right when the tank crew was en route to meet the British journalists, the Challenger 2 got stuck in weak soil.
Yeah, baby.
Okay, but that's the ultimate humiliation. Oh my god. Barely any of these tanks could actually reach the front line to engage Russian troops. Now they're all used from a distance. As of now, only 50% of the remaining Challenger 2s are combat ready, meaning a grand total of 6. And the Ukrainians mostly use them as howitzers. Look, that's as humiliating as playing in the Premier League and then ending up in the National League. I could barely find any reports on combat record, maintenance, or repairs, because it's barely used on the battlefield. And that's why I think the Challenger 2 deserves to sit with the Switchblade in Tier F. Now we understand why the British Army has more horses than tanks. It's maybe a wise decision. Oh, I see you're laughing, America. Well, let's talk about the M1A1 Abrams. Remember how the NPR described it as the most reputed battle tank in the world? Is that so? The reality is that M1 Abrams tanks never faced a worthy opponent until the Ukraine war. Here on PBS, on the 11th of May 2023, Ukraine awaits arrival of US tanks that could be game changer in fight against Russia. For Ukraine's summer offensive, the US said it would send 31 M1 Abrams tanks. 31! While the US military literally has thousands of them sitting in some depots across the desert. For the US, giving 31 Abrams tanks was like the change you give homeless people waiting at the red light. In regards to stats, I'm not the ultimate tanky, but overall the M1A1 is very similar to the German Leopard 2. The main difference is that the Abrams uses a more complex gas turbine. And just with that, you already know what the problems will be. Unfortunately, the Abrams arrived too late to turn Ukraine's summer offensive around. And they also arrived too late to effectively defend Avdiivka. And that's a big L by the US administration. That's how they got assigned to the infamous 47th Mechanized Brigade. The 47th was truly an all-American brigade. M16 assault rifle, M2A2 Bradley IFV, and now the M1A1 Abrams. But like the much-beloved all-American diners, they struggled to survive in the modern era. On the 23rd of February 2024, we were presented with the M1's first combat use in Ukraine.
And it's gone.
3 days later, the first M1 Abrams was up in flames. Then a second one on March 3rd, immobilized by an anti-tank mine. 2 days later, a third one was destroyed by an ATGM strike. Oh hell no, that's not looking good. And then on the 10th of March, a fourth one was taken out. Oh, you thought it was done? And at the end of March, a fifth one was hit by a Landsat drone. Within a month, 5 M1A1 Abrams were gone using a plethora of cheap Russian firepower. 5 out of 31. In the following weeks, Ukrainian military personnel raised some complaints about this US-made tank. In an interview with CNN, one crew member with the call sign Joker said, "The tank's armor is not sufficient for this moment. It doesn't protect the crew. For real, today, this is the war of drones. So now when the tank rolls out, they always try to hit them." The Abrams appear to have technical issues as well. One parked under a tree was almost immobile during CNN's visit due to an engine problem. The crew say despite the vehicle having just been shipped in from Poland. They also complain of how in rain or fog, condensation can fry the electronics inside the vehicle. Ukrainian tank crews also complained about the type of ammunition they were given which didn't suit their needs. They received armor-piercing rounds for tank-on-tank engagements, which are extremely rare. Callsign Joker then explained that much more often we work as artillery. You need to take apart a tree line or a building. We had a case when we fired 17 rounds into a house and it was still standing. Ouch! That's one of the biggest diss I've heard in this war. The military-industrial complex could not let this slide. They gaslit the shit out of Ukraine. US military officials suggested the tank losses were because Ukrainian forces did not adopt tactics that could have made the Abrams tanks more effective, ignoring the command arms approach that had been endorsed during the training phase. Callsign Joker had to say something about this NATO training. He switched to English to mimic a NATO soldier. Call the aviation, call the artillery. Bled, we have no aviation and artillery. We only have tank, and it's the problem. Ukrainians are such trolls. June 4th, 2024, former top US Army general in Europe calls Ukrainian complaints about the M1 Abrams tank BS. And 2 months later, US general admits Abrams tanks is vulnerable. Brigadier General Geoffrey Norman admitted that the M1A1 Abrams was not designed to be protected against the attacks from above that we're seeing in Ukraine right now, whether it be roving munitions or drones, or anti-tank guided missiles. What? What? Here from Forbes, Ukrainian crews got tired of asking the Americans for extra armor for their M1 tanks. They installed their own armor instead. To remedy the situation, Ukrainian mechanics added Contact 1 explosive reactive armor and cages all around the tanks. And I'm pretty sure it's American tank crews that have to go through a training session with the Ukrainians. By July 9, 2025, 22 American M1A1 Abrams were confirmed as destroyed, abandoned, or captured by the enemy. 22 write-offs out of 31. 70% were gone. What a disaster! Thankfully, Australia replenished the stocks with the delivery of another 49 units, with the last batch arriving last December. And the first one of the Aussie Abrams was destroyed on the 22nd of December. As of now, 25 M1A1 Abrams were reported as destroyed, damaged, or captured. Merry Christmas, America! Look, since I placed the Leopard 2 in B, and since the Leopard 2 obviously mugged the Abrams, we can only position the M1A1 Abrams in Tier C. It just doesn't really make a difference on the battlefield. I told you we would go in chronological order, but look, rules can't be broken. Especially since I make the rules. Because next up is the Storm Shadow. The Storm Shadow cruise missile was described as a real game changer from a range perspective. The Storm Shadow was developed in the 1990s by MBDA, a joint venture between British and French defense companies. In France, it's known as the SCALP. KOOYF received its first batch of Storm Shadow missiles from the UK in May 2023. It can strike targets 250 kilometers away with a payload of 450 kilograms. The key is that, assisted by foreign experts, the Ukrainian Air Force modified many of its ex-Soviet Su-24s to launch Storm Shadows. Some of the most famous operations include a strike against the Chongar rail bridge that links Crimea to Kherson Oblast. 2 months later, on the 13th of September, the Ukrainian Air Force sunk the landing ship Minsk in the Sevastopol shipyard. 1 week later, Storm Shadow cruise missiles were used to strike the Black Sea Fleet's headquarters in Crimea. And at last, on the 26th of December 2023, Ukrainian Su-24s once again used Storm Shadows against the landing ship Novocherkassk anchored in Fedosia. As you can see, the main task of the Storm Shadows was to disrupt Russian logistics to Crimea, as well as targeting Russia's Black Sea Fleet, especially the warships vulnerable in shipyards. All these strikes were definitely a pain for Russia, especially since, from what I read, these cruise missiles can't be jammed. And after that, we didn't hear much about these Storm Shadows anymore. They just vanished. They're relatively rare on the battlefield, and can you guess why? Ukraine simply ran out. The UK and France simply exhausted their limited supplies. It's just after Ukraine received a new batch in November that, magic, new strikes were reported, like the Storm Shadow strike against the factory in Bryansk in March 2026, and this attack against the Shahid drone depot at the Donetsk airport. So there was no problem with the weapon itself, right? Well, Russia's MOD claimed to have shot down numerous Storm Shadow cruise missiles. Actually, Russian Telegram channels have a joke. Do you know what lives at the bottom of the ocean? A British cruise missile! The Russians reported dozens upon dozens of interceptions, but never with tangible proof. I found this one from June 2023 during its flight towards Berdyansk, and this other one from July. Meanwhile, callsign Orenburg, the commander of a Tor air defense system, said that once enemy aircraft have taken off, the Russians know it's possibly for a strike using a Storm Shadow. In response, all Russian air defense units get into position. He explained that the Storm Shadow isn't a difficult target to intercept, but it is fast and flies at low altitude, so timely detection remains crucial. There's no public reports on the interception rate of Storm Shadow missiles. But let's use logic. If Ukraine received up to 300 Storm Shadows or SCALPs, and we have confirmation of about 40 successful strikes, shouldn't Ukraine still have plenty of them left in reserve? What happened to the 250 others? Putin, give me back my Storm Shadows! This means Storm Shadows have a confirmed hit rate of 13%.
Shameful display!
And they're so efficient that now Ukraine prefers to develop its own missiles to strike Russian targets. Yes, it's true that the UK urgently sent a new batch last fall, but it's not going to turn the war around. So I think Tier C is very reasonable for the Storm Shadow. The last NATO game changer in today's list is the US-made F-16 fighter aircraft, also known as the Viper. The RAND Corporation claimed that with the right type of munitions, F-16s could be game changers. I read they were important because they would upgrade the Ukrainian Air Force aging Soviet-era jets, which is ironic because both fighter aircraft date back from the Cold War. Other than that, F-16s were mainly used to intercept Russian cruise missiles and drones, but they could also carry out precision ground strikes. The problem is that they arrived too late on the battlefield.
Oh shit, here we go again.
They could have been really useful during Ukraine's 2023 summer offensive. But we only got the first confirmation of F-16s in Ukrainian skies on the 4th of August 2024. Ukraine's Western allies pledged a total of 85 Fighting Falcons, mainly from the Netherlands, Belgium, and Denmark. And apparently F-16s were exceeding expectations of Ukraine's pilots. F-16s were great because they could compensate the problems surrounding the Patriot missile batteries, and to make sure that none of these aircraft would be grounded due to a lack of spare parts. The United States reportedly gave Ukraine non-operational F-16s from its boneyard of retired aircraft, Hawks without engines or radars that will provide much-needed parts to keep the UAF jets in the air. And as for maintenance, the Ukrainian Air Force set up mobile workshops that are capable of repairing F-16s on their own. You see, that's smart. They finally learned their lessons after all the problems with NATO tanks. There were also high hopes that F-16s could supplement the lack of Patriot batteries to fend off aerial threats, especially with the Advanced Precision Kill Weapon System. A small laser-guided rocket is a far better option. They're much cheaper than Russian long-range kamikaze drones. And an F-16 can carry 28 or more of them on a single sortie, compared to only 4 M9s. Eventually, the first confirmed loss of a Ukrainian F-16 occurred on the 26th of August 2024, just weeks after the initial deliveries and operational debut of the jets. The worst is that, according to investigations, pilot Alexei Mes was shot down due to friendly fire from a Patriot launcher. No matter how you put it, an own goal is always humiliating. Am I right, Kuwait? Am I right? As a result, President Volodymyr Zelensky dismissed Oleg Shuk from his position as Air Force commander the day after the crash. This is what a Ukraine pilot actually said about NATO training.
Коли ми вже повернулись додому з навчання, зіштовхнулися з реальністю. Ту тактику, яку нас навчали за кордоном, вона не зовсім підходить війні в нашій, тому що та тактика теж базується на війнах, в яких приймали участь партнери попередньо, і ця війна докорінно відрізняється від тих війн.
Look, it's always the same story. In some cases, F-16 pilots assigned to escort missions deliberately expose themselves to enemy aircraft to draw fire, forcing Russian fighters to expend missiles and creating a window for strike aircraft carrying precision-guided bombs to reach their targets. That could explain how on the 12th of April 2025 in Sumy Oblast, 26-year-old Captain Pavlo Ivanov was KIA. It was also the first confirmed shoot-down by Russian forces. Another F-16 was shot down a month later on the 16th of May 2025. But thankfully this time the pilot safely ejected and survived. On the 29th of June, pilot Maxim Ustimenko managed to shoot down 7 drones and missiles before being hit himself. And he lost his life during the crash. That's how Ukraine lost its 4th F-16. Since then, no other F-16 losses were to be reported. So it's evident that the Ukrainian Air Force learned from its past mistakes. In a way, the arrival of F-16s marked the rebirth of the Ukrainian Air Force. Not only do they help protect the sky against Russian drones and missiles, but by late 2025, F-16s have integrated effectively into the Ukrainian Air Force, handling 80% of combat sorties according to some reports. On the 19th of November, Ukrainska Pravda reported Ukrainian F-16 pilots have struck over 1,300 aerial targets and more than 300 Russian ground targets. Here from the 30th of November, you can see a Russian KH-101 cruise missile being chased by an F-16. This other pilot reported having shot down 6 Russian missiles, 2 with medium-range missiles, 2 with short-range missiles, and another 2 with the aircraft's cannon. It seems F-16s are more effective and cost-friendly to defend the sky of Ukraine compared to Patriot batteries. The F-16 is an easy A for me. It might not have turned the war around, but it definitely allowed the Ukrainian Air Force to regain a much-needed presence on the battlefield. My friends, this wraps up the NATO Game Changer tier list. So let's go over the list once again. Tier F, Switchblade, Excalibur GPS rounds and the Challenger 2. Tier D, Javelin, M777, PZH-2000, AHS Scrab, Bayraktar TB2 drone, and the Patriot. Tier C, NLAW, Storm Shadow, SCALP, and the M1A1 Abrams. Tier B, the Leopard 2. Tier A, HIMARS and F-16. And sitting on the throne at Tier S, the French-made Caesar self-propelled howitzer and the American M2A2 Bradley IFV. 3 out of the top 5 are made in the USA. But if you look at the 8 weapon systems at the bottom, 5 of them are also from the United States. Let me know what you think of this ranking in the comment section below. Technically, the true S tier should be Starlink. It really helped the AFU with the command and control, so I'm aware of that. And of course, there are new NATO aircraft that are being introduced on the battlefield of Ukraine, like the Swedish Gripen and the French Mirage 2000, or even maybe the Rafale. There's also the Swedish artillery system that was recently introduced, but it's yet too early to review them. If you think some NATO weapon systems should be on the list, but that have not been mentioned, also let me know in the comment section below. That's all I have for you today, and see you in the next one.